All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating analytical journey straight into the living room, the kitchen, and honestly, the very heart of human relationships. We're going to break down the unseen architecture of how couples fight, why they actually stay together, and those hidden emotional economies that govern intimacy. So get ready, because we are diving deep into the anatomy of marital games.
So let me start by asking you something provocative. Do healthy relationships actually require total harmony? Culturally, we're fed this myth, right? This idea that successful marriages are essentially just pure, uninterrupted communication and total peace. We're told that if you're fighting, well, something must be broken. But what if that's completely wrong? What if a certain kind of dysfunction is actually the very glue holding the whole system together?
Consider this absolutely striking reality. Many marriages are not communication systems. They are stable conflict equilibrium systems. Let that sink in for a second. A stable conflict equilibrium system. It reveals a profound and maybe slightly uncomfortable reality. A lot of relationships actually stabilize not through perfect resolution, but through predictable, repetitive conflict. The fighting isn't a bug in the code. For a lot of couples, it's literally the operating system.
To tear this concept down to its studs, here's our roadmap for The Explainer. We're going to examine the conflict equilibrium, uncover the hidden rules and roles, track the conflict repair loop, figure out how to break the game, map these mechanics to other domains, and then wrap up with a modern reality check.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the conflict equilibrium, and how systems stay stable through strife.
Now, when we talk about marital games, look, we're not talking about Monopoly here. We're talking about continuous, structurally embedded, highly emotional systems running in the background of daily life. These are repetitive, emotional interaction loops. In these games, partners completely replace the direct communication of what they actually need with indirect signaling. Why? Well, because these recurring conflict repair cycles actually stabilize the relationship. They create this predictable rhythm that, surprisingly enough, feels way safer to the participants than sitting down and actually solving the core problem. Think about the couple that bickers about loading the dishwasher literally every single night. It's not about the plates, is it? It's about the rhythm.
And this brilliantly illustrates what's really happening under the surface. It's basically an emotional substitution mechanism. A partner has direct, deeply vulnerable needs, right? They want love, respect, safety. But expressing those things, that requires massive vulnerability. So what do they substitute it with? Indirect signals. Criticism, the silent treatment, sarcasm. Honestly, it is so much easier to snap at your partner for leaving their shoes out than it is to look them dead in the eye and say, "Hey, I feel ignored and unsafe when you don't listen to me."
Which brings us to Section 2, hidden rules and roles. Because if indirect signals are the currency, we need to know who the actors are and what incentives are keeping this whole board game running.
You've probably seen these dynamics play out. Partners essentially lock themselves into these incredibly rigid emotional identities. You might have the critical parent perfectly matched up with the rebellious child, or maybe the needy child paired off with a controlling parent, or even the classic alternating victim and persecutor dynamic. These roles are held firmly in place by attachment anxiety. A deep fear of abandonment fuels indirect control behavior, while a fear of losing independence leads to emotional withdrawal. They're just perfectly matched puzzle pieces of dysfunction, playing off each other day after day to keep the game alive.
But you're probably wondering, why keep playing if it's so miserable? Well, because the relationship acts as this closed-loop emotional economy, one that massively rewards familiarity over honesty. It deliberately avoids the direct confrontation of unmet needs because actually facing those needs might mean facing the end of the relationship itself. And it actively discourages radical transparency because transparency totally destabilizes those carefully constructed roles we just talked about. It's wild, but people routinely choose the misery they know over the mystery they don't.
Let's move to Section 3, the conflict repair loop. Let's break down the actual mechanics of a closed-loop economy.
Let's see how this builds step by step, because it functions almost identically to a highly predictable software loop. Step 1 is conflict escalation. Tension just starts building over some totally minor issue. Then boom, step 2, emotional discharge. The argument happens. The yelling, the crying, the slammed doors. As intense as it is, this actually allows a massive release of built-up anxiety, which naturally brings us to step 3, temporary reconciliation, the makeup phase, the heartfelt apologies, the renewed connection. But then comes step 4, return to baseline tension. The actual root issue is never solved, so that tension slowly begins to build all over again. Wash, rinse, repeat.
Now, here's a crucial, honestly kind of surprising twist. Control in marital games comes from controlling the emotional escalation cycles, not from actually winning the arguments. Winning doesn't matter. Real power in this system is the power of timing. It's wielded by the person who gets to decide exactly when to withdraw attention, when to escalate things emotionally, or when to induce guilt. The person who has their hand on the thermostat of the conflict, that's the person who holds the real power in the relationship.
So what happens when the system crashes? When the loop just spins wildly out of control and arguments never resolve anything? Let's pivot to actionable counter-strategies in Section 4, how to break the game, focusing on system repair logic.
So the crucial point is how you initiate that system repair logic. First off, you've got to shift out of that parent-child dynamic and force direct adult-to-adult communication. You have to call out the game, literally identify the recurring loops out loud as patterns, not as unique, isolated problems that just happen to pop up today. You have to break the dependency on emotional escalation just to get your partner's attention and replace all that noise with explicit need articulation. Just state exactly what you need, entirely without the camouflage.
Now, if you think this emotional loop model only applies to romantic couples, think again. Let's shift gears to Section 5, games and other domains, where we see these universally applied mechanics.
This is wild, but the very same emotional loop we see in marriages transfers directly to massive, high-stress strategic domains. Look at trading systems. A day trader takes a painful loss, has an intense emotional reaction, and executes a revenge trade just to immediately discharge the tension, which usually means they lose even more. Or cybersecurity. Hackers literally use social engineering to exploit our exact same relationship trust and emotional dependency patterns to induce a highly predictable response. Even in military and politics, alliance dynamics routinely manage stability entirely through manufactured tension and reconciliation cycles. It's the exact same game, just played on a much bigger board.
But as powerful as this framework is, we have to look at it objectively. That brings us to Section 6, a modern reality check, pitting the original theory against modern science.
The original source material for marital games undeniably has some massive blind spots. First, it heavily overfocuses on internal psychological dynamics while completely underplaying the very real external economic and logistical constraints that can keep couples trapped in a bad situation. It also assumes a symmetry of manipulation, basically ignoring the fact that real-world power dynamics are very often wildly uneven. And crucially, it runs the dangerous risk of framing perfectly normal, healthy emotional conflict as some sort of manipulative game.
What's really fascinating about this comparison is the stark contrast between the historical and modern perspectives. The historical behavioral view insists that conflict is always this deeply manipulative psychological game. But the modern view steps in with a much-needed correction. Conflict is very often just an information processing breakdown under extreme stress. Sometimes couples literally just run out of communication bandwidth. Not every single fight is a grand, manipulative chess match. Sometimes, honestly, you're just exhausted, stressed out, and simply failing to coordinate.
Which leads us to a final, pretty heavy question to help you evaluate your own systems. Is your conflict a signal correction mechanism or an emotional control mechanism? Are you and your partner genuinely just trying to correct a breakdown in communication, or are you actively playing the game to control the board? Take a really close look at your own loops, because truly understanding the game is the only way you can ever decide to finally stop playing.